reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jean, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, June 21st, 2026 issue of the front section of the New York Times on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Hal Hegseth is waging a war against diversity. Blocking of promotion for a black admiral illustrates the use of secret vetting, by Greg Jaffe and Kate Kelly. The Navy's top leadership believed that Rear Admiral Stephen D. Barnett was by far the best choice to lead the command that oversees the Navy's bases at home and abroad. He had more experience than the other candidates and had successfully managed the aftermath of one of the Navy's biggest messes, a fuel spill that contaminated an aquifer on a base in Hawaii, sickening thousands. The final decision this spring fell to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. To many in the Navy, Admiral Barnett's promotion seemed like a foregone conclusion. The officer, however, had a big strike against him. Like other black military leaders, he had been encouraged by his superiors to help the Navy recruit and retain minority officers who remained significantly underrepresented in the force. His years-old remarks on the importance of diversity had been flagged in a secret vetting process designed to weed out senior leaders whom Mr. Hegseth and his team pegged as a problem. Instead of Admiral Barnett, Mr. Hegseth selected a white officer who was the Navy's leadership's third choice. So far this year, Mr. Hegseth has blocked the promotions of at least 40 senior officers to general and admiral ranks. About half of those are women or members of minority groups. This article, based on interviews with 15 current and former military and administrative officials, is a look inside the process Mr. Hegseth and his team have used to halt the advancement of senior officers for reasons that have nothing to do with the fighting wars or job performance. It tells the story of one black officer, Admiral Barnett, whose blocked promotion shocked and angered senior Navy officials. The officials discussed sensitive personnel matters on the condition of anonymity. Admiral Barnett, who was expected to retire, declined a request for comment. A Pentagon spokesman did not respond to a detailed list of questions. In books and speeches, Mr. Hegseth has maintained that the Pentagon's push over the past decade to build a more diverse force had elevated women and minority officers to senior jobs that they had not earned. When I think about my career in uniform, in almost every instance where there has been a poor leadership or people in positions they're not qualified for, it was based on either the reality or the perception of a diversity hire. Mr. Hegseth, a former major in the Army National Guard, wrote in his 2024 book, The War on Warriors. As Defense Secretary, he has promised to install a new promotion system that will be ruthlessly meritocratic and focused squarely on warfighting ability. In practice, though, his approach has made it harder for black and female officers to get promoted to senior ranks, even when their records are exemplary. Such was the case with Admiral Barnett. In 2021, he was invited to speak at a Black History Month event at a naval base in Maryland. He talked about his career as a flight officer on Navy P-3 Orions, which track enemy submarines. Just one generation before me, it was nearly unthinkable for a black person to become a naval aviator, he said. He reflected on his mentors, downplaying the importance of race. What helped me was people who didn't look like me, he said. And he spoke about building a force that better represented the nation it serves. As the country becomes more diverse, it makes sense for our military to become more diverse, Admiral Barnett said. Monolithic organizations cannot and will not survive. At the time, the country was wrestling with the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man who was murdered by a white Minneapolis police officer 9 months earlier. The Navy had just released an 142-page report with recommendations to remove barriers that had held back high-performing women and minority sailors. 5 years later, Mr. Hegseth was leading the Pentagon. Now Admiral Barnett's remarks are being cited as a reason to deny him a promotion that senior Navy officials said he deserved. It's black over white. Mr. Hegseth has argued that troops most likely to suffer discrimination in the military are white. He traced the problem to the protests and racial reckoning that followed Mr. Floyd's murder. The Pentagon's generals and admirals, he wrote in a 2024 book, started searching for evidence of institutional bias that did not exist. In the process, he argued, they destroyed the military's meritocratic culture. It's black over white, female over male, gay over straight, Mr. Hegseth wrote. Internal Pentagon studies told a different story. Nearly a third of black U.S. military troops reported experiencing racial discrimination, harassment, or both during a 12-month period, according to a survey conducted during President Trump's first term. In his book, Mr. Hegseth dismissed such data. As Secretary of Defense, he has fired or sidelined more than 24 generals and admirals. Among those dismissed were General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., the second black man to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the first woman to lead the Navy. These ousters were all publicly announced. The extent of Mr. Hegseth's vetoing of generals and admirals selected for promotion has remained secret until now. By law, 1-star and 2-star officers are chosen by promotion selection boards made up of senior military officers. The meetings are so confidential that board members are not permitted to tell others that they are part of the process. Last year, Mr. Hegseth and his top aides ordered the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps to do online searches of the officers selected by the boards to look for photos, videos, or news articles that might draw Mr. Hegseth's ire, current and former defense officials said. The officials undertaking the reviews hoped that if they could show that the officers had been following previous Pentagon policies, that Mr. Hegseth would allow their nominations to go forward to the White House and Congress for final approval. Inside the Pentagon, such material was referred to as DROG, short for derogatory material. Once the reviews led by each military service were complete, Mr. Hegseth's staff members conducted their own searches to make sure that the services had not missed or intentionally ignored anything. It was not clear whether Mr. Hegseth had the authority to pull names off the list. Congress had entrusted management of 1-star and 2-star promotion boards to the service secretaries, not the Secretary of Defense. The first test case was with an Army 1-star promotion board. Last fall, Mr. Hegseth ordered Army Secretary Daniel P. Driscoll to remove 2 black and 2 female officers from a 29-person promotion list. Mr. Driscoll, citing their decades-long records of exemplary service, repeatedly refused. The standoff lasted months. Finally, in March, Mr. Hegseth removed the officer's name from the list and forwarded it to the White House. Around the same time, a senior aide to Mr. Hegseth accused the Navy in a handwritten note of promoting candidates that the Defense Secretary believed should have been blocked. Mr. Hegseth's aides wanted the Navy to form a new promotion board that would choose a new list, Navy officials said. The Navy pushed back. Mr. Hegseth instead removed 9 officers from the Navy's original 31-person list. Soon Mr. Hegseth was pulling officers from nearly every active duty and reserve officer promotion list. Officers who had spoken publicly about the importance of diversity in the ranks were removed from lists. So too were those who had strongly urged their troops to get COVID vaccines. Mr. Hegseth has removed a total of 32 officers from Air Force and Navy 1-star and 2-star promotion lists, defense officials said. The only black officer and the only female officer were removed from a Marine Corps promotion list. The 2 Marines' promotions are in limbo. Much of the vetting process has remained shrouded in secrecy. In some instances, officers up for promotion were not told that they had been removed from the lists. Mr. Hegseth also had refused to give Congress the names of officers pulled from the lists, officials said. The Senate version of the 2027 defense bill would require Mr. Hegseth to provide a written justification and notification when removing an officer from a promotion list. Even the services often are not told why individual officers are vetoed. Military officials, though, said they had noticed patterns. Officers who had commanded aircraft carriers or amphibious assault ships have been especially vulnerable. The reason? Those ships have public affairs officers on board who document their skippers participating in events related to diversity or the COVID vaccine. Now, those articles, videos, and photos posted on Navy websites were being used against them, current and former Navy officials said. Among those targeted was Vice Admiral Sarah Joyner, a 3-star fighter pilot whom military officials wanted to move into a higher profile job in the Pentagon. Admiral Joyner had spoken at events designed to encourage and mentor female aviators and submariners. She also had appeared on a Navy recruiting ad describing her childhood and her trailblazing career as the first woman to command a carrier air wing. "One day, everyone will see that I'm not just a girl with a dream," her character in the 2021 ad said. "I'm a sailor with one." To Mr. Hegseth, the appearances and ad were a big problem. Unlike with the 1-star and 2-star ranks, there are no promotion boards for most 3-star and 4-star generals and admirals. Typically, the service secretaries and service chiefs identify their preferred candidate among 2 or 3 choices and present them to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who can weigh in. Then the candidates are sent to the defense secretary, who picks a nominee from the shortlist. Admiral Joyner worked for General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, running a team that conducted classified war games and assessments of new weapon systems. General Kane urged Mr. Hegseth to nominate her for the new position, current and former officials said. He also asked John Phelan, then the Navy Secretary, to help persuade Mr. Hegseth to reconsider her promotion. Their interventions failed. Senior officers who are not promoted are usually expected to leave. The New York Times was unable to reach Admiral Joyner for comment. She retired last fall. A high-flying Navy career. When Admiral Barnett joined the Navy in 1991, he never expected he would become an admiral. He didn't come from a family with deep history of military service and had not attended the U.S. Naval Academy. In 2023, he shared the story of his life and career in an interview with his hometown radio station in Columbia, Tennessee. Admiral Barnett's interest in the Navy was piqued by one of his fraternity brothers at Tennessee State University, a historically black college. At the time, he was married with a child. The Navy offered a good salary, adventure, health care, and stability. "So one day after thermodynamics class, I joined," he told the radio host. "I kind of did it on a whim." Admiral Barnett, who went by the call sign Big Daddy, recalled how much he enjoyed being part of a team. His P-3 surveillance plane had a crew of 11 sailors who flew sorties lasting as long as 10 hours. He rose through the ranks, flying more than 250 missions in Iraq and serving in increasingly sensitive commands. Then in 2021, the Navy's Red Hill bulk fuel facility leaked petroleum into an aquifer in Hawaii that tens of thousands of residents depended on for their drinking water. Admiral Samuel Paparo, who was serving as commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, asked Admiral Barnett to rush to Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam in Hawaii to lead the cleanup. "I only need you there about 12 months, he recalled Admiral Paparo telling him. Admiral Barnett remained for more than 3 years, working to contaminate the aquifer and win back the trust of the scared and angry residents. In a statement, Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat of Hawaii, recalled him as an important and trusted partner. "He was proactive, communicative, and professional," she said. Admiral Barnett's work fixing Red Hill and experience overseeing 3 large regional commands made him the Navy's top pick for a 3rd star and the job running its bases. Before senior Navy officials recommended Admiral Barnett for the promotion, they searched the internet for anything in his public record that might offend Mr. Hegseth. Navy officials hoped that if they put Admiral Barnett's remarks in context, Mr. Hegseth might overlook them. Admiral Barnett had spoken at a few Black History Month events and talked in interviews about the legacy of service members like Dory Miller, who became the first Black recipient of the Navy Cross for his heroics at Pearl Harbor. A photo of Mr. Miller hung in Admiral Barnett's Hawaii office. In 2018, Admiral Barnett had appeared at a Navy-sponsored event during LGBT Pride Month. Together, we can make the world safer, freer, and more equal for everyone, he said, according to an article posted on a Navy website. His statements were in line with the Pentagon policy at the time, the Navy concluded. If one were scrutinizing with extreme sensitivity, the only potential signals are those of empathy and inclusivity, according to an internal review obtained by the Times. His digital footprint is remarkably disciplined and issue-focused. Mr. Phelan, the Navy's senior civilian leader, and Admiral Darrell Cottle, its highest-ranking officer, picked Admiral Barnett to lead Navy Installations Command. General Kane agreed. The final decision, though, did not fall to the Navy or the chairman. It was made by Mr. Hegseth, who decided that Admiral Barnett should not advance. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Strait is closed, Iran announced. Setback to Trump's deal as Lebanon is cited, by Abdi Latif Dahir and Julian E. Barnes. Iran's military said on Saturday that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, again to maritime traffic, citing Israel's military operations in Lebanon and what it called a, quote, clear breach of U.S. commitments to implement a preliminary deal to end the war. The move threatened to once again rattle the global oil markets, which had begun to calm after the deal was announced last week. The closure also raised questions about the status of the deal itself, which was a precursor to negotiations on the future of Iran's nuclear program. As of Saturday afternoon, those negotiations were still scheduled to take place. The Qatam al-Abini Central Headquarters, a central military command, cited the killing and the displacement of Lebanese residents from southern Lebanon, along with Israel's refusal to withdraw from the region, as factors for closing the strait, according to a statement carried by state media. The deal between the United States and Iran stipulated an end to hostilities on all fronts, including Lebanon, where Israel had been fighting Hezbollah, an Iran-backed militant group. Israel and Hezbollah were not party to the deal, however, and after a relative lull following the signing, both sides resumed deadly strikes on Friday and Saturday. The Iranian military did not specify why it claimed the United States had not upheld its commitments under the deal, but Iran expected the United States to rein in Israel, its ally. Leading up to the deal last week, President Trump, eager to get it signed, had pressured Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to tamp down Israel's offensive in Lebanon. The United States had not commented by midday Saturday on the Iranian military statement. Iran had closed the waterway, a vital waterway for oil and gas shipping, in the early days of the war, shaking the global economy. After the deal was announced, there had been an uptick in the number of ships passing through the strait, though traffic had not yet returned to normal levels. Following the closure of the strait on Saturday, the naval arm of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps warned vessels not to approach the strait, or their safety and security would be at risk. The announcement came as Israel and Hezbollah exchanged fire on Saturday, just a day after the ceasefire between the two sides had raised hopes of easing their conflict and smoothing a path toward an end to the U.S.-Iran war. The truce, agreed to on Friday afternoon, held for a few hours, but early on Saturday, Lebanese state media reported Israeli airstrikes on towns and cities in southern Lebanon. At least 16 people were killed and a dozen wounded, Lebanon's civil defense emergency responders said in a statement. The Israeli military said that Hezbollah has fired more than 50 projectiles at Israeli forces in southern Lebanon overnight, prompting Israeli strikes on what the military described as a Hezbollah target in the area. In a statement on Saturday, Hezbollah said that it was adhering to the ceasefire, but accused Israel of attempting to advance overnight towards Ali Haltar, a strategic ridge overlooking the Nebatai area in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah said its fighters had ambushed an Israeli infantry force. The group said that while it remained committed to the agreement, it would not tolerate any attempt by the enemy to seize additional territory or expand its occupation. Israeli officials maintain that they will continue carrying out operations in what it calls the Security Zone, a stretch of territory that now extends more than 6 miles deep into Lebanon. The Lebanese military said that one of its soldiers had been killed in an Israeli strike. In unusually forthright language, the military accused Israel of seeking to obstruct any solution that could restore stability in Lebanon. The Israeli military said it was looking into the report of the soldier's death. The Lebanese military, which is backed and funded in large part by the United States, is not party to the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. But Lebanese soldiers have been repeatedly sucked into the violence and killed in Israeli strikes. The conflict in Lebanon, once seen as a secondary front to the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, has become one of the main obstacles to ending it. But even after the closure of the strait was announced, Pakistani officials who have served as intermediaries in talks to end the war said that the next round of negotiations between the United States and Iran would begin on Sunday in Switzerland. Vice President J.D. Vance told Fox News that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who serve as envoys for the President Trump, were in Switzerland and ready to negotiate. Switzerland's foreign ministry said on Saturday that it was continuing to provide a discreet and reliable setting for the talks, adding, without naming them, that the diplomats from several countries remained engaged in efforts to keep the dialogue going. A recent U.S. intelligence report said that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel was likely to continue military action against Hezbollah, even if it hindered the peace efforts between the United States and Iran, according to American officials. Mr. Netanyahu is under intense domestic pressure to continue operations against Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel. Israel views Hezbollah as a critical threat, and Israeli officials do not believe the group's attacks can go unanswered. The Iran ceasefire deal is deeply unpopular in Israel, where commentators criticize its failure to address Iran's missile program, its requirement that U.S. forces leave the region, and, especially, its constraints on Israeli military operations in Lebanon. Rivals' victory may force Starmer's last stand, by Stephen Castle. Solemn, controlled, and with the delivery of the top-ranked lawyer he once was, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain was out early on Friday, pointing out that no formal leadership challenge had yet been triggered against him, and pledging to fight to keep his job. Some 200 miles north, his Labour Party rival, Andy Burnham, promised change and urgency as he addressed jubilant supporters who helped him win a special election the day before. Declaring a new era of hope, Mr. Burnham, whose victory means he is now eligible to challenge the Prime Minister, said that Labour faced its, quote, last chance to change, end quote, adding, "We're going to take it." The stark contrast between the two politicians' styles helps explain why many within Labour now believe Mr. Burnham should replace Mr. Starmer, who has become one of the most unpopular prime ministers in British polling history. Pressure is now rising on Mr. Starmer to agree to a timetable to relinquish power and avoid a divisive battle for his job. Mr. Burnham, who has twice tried but failed to become Labour leader, has made no secret of his ambitions to lead his party in the country. With his stunning special election victory in Makersfield in northwest England, where he won a majority of about 55%, he appears to have demonstrated that he has the charisma and star quality to take on Reform UK, the populist right-wing party that has upended British politics. For the past 2 years, Reform's rising popularity in the polls under the leadership of Nigel Farage, an ally of President Trump and an architect of Brexit, has terrified its opponents. The mechanics of what happens next, however, are hazy. Burnham doesn't want to be seen politically assassinating Starmer, said Stephen Fielding, Emeritus Professor of Political History at the University of Nottingham. He wants him to go, at least ostensibly, under his own steam. Mr. Starmer would lose if he decided to run in a leadership contest against Mr. Burnham, Professor Fielding argued, and the process would divide and damage the Labour Party. It would be like Custer's last stand. Nobody wins, the party won't win, the country won't win, and he won't win. To trigger a leadership contest, a challenger needs to be a Labour lawmaker, a hurdle Mr. Burnham has now cleared, and have the support of 20% of their colleagues, or 80 lawmakers, currently. Under the Labour rulebook, fee-paying party members would get the final choice. However, if Mr. Starmer agreed not to fight and Mr. Burnham was the only candidate, the membership would not have to vote. Wes Streeting, who recently quit the cabinet as health secretary, has indicated he wants to run for leader, though opinion polls show him to be significantly less popular than Mr. Burnham. An alternative to leadership race could be for Mr. Starmer to step aside, perhaps in time for Labor's annual conference in September, and for Mr. Streeting to accept a senior cabinet position under Mr. Burnham in exchange for agreeing not to force a contest. On Friday morning, Louise Haig, a Labor lawmaker and close ally of Mr. Burnham, said she hoped the process would be as managed and controlled as possible. "I would hope that Andy and the Prime Minister can speak over the coming days," Ms. Haig told the BBC. "We want to avoid a leadership contest if possible, and we hope we can agree a way forward." So far, Mr. Starmer has given no indication that he will bow to pressure and step aside. However, while leading the party in opposition in 2021, he once briefly contemplated resigning for the good of the party after Labor lost a special election in Hartlepool. He later told Sky News he considered quitting because "I didn't feel that I should be bigger than the party, and if I couldn't bring about the change, perhaps there should be a change." One way of putting pressure on Mr. Starmer would be for the ministers to threaten to resign from his government if he refuses to go. In 2022, mass ministerial resignations forced the Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson from Downing Street by making his government untenable. If he's confident enough of his support, Mr. Burnham could effectively tell Mr. Starmer to choose how he wants to wrap up his time as Prime Minister, the easy way or the hard way. In either case, the scale of Mr. Burnham's victory has left him in a commanding position. In the fight for Makerfield reform, UK candidate Robert Kenyon faced competition from new far-right party called Restore Britain. Some analysts expected that to split the vote, letting Mr. Burnham through by default. But Mr. Burnham's vote total easily exceeded that of both Reform and Restore combined. Some factors helped Mr. Burnham, who, as mayor of Greater Manchester, had established himself as a popular local politician. Because of his well-known ambitions to take over the Labour Party, some voters may have opted for him in hope of getting rid of Mr. Starmer. On Friday, Mr. Farage said he was disappointed with the outcome, but said Labour had benefited from running a campaign that urged voters, "Vote Burnham, get Starmer out." Reform, Mr. Farage argued, was successful in many municipal elections in May after arguing that voting for his party would help get rid of Starmer, so we were slightly hoist with our own petard. But the loss in another special election will prompt soul-searching in Reform, which saw Makerfield as a stronghold. Reform has led other parties in national opinion polls for more than a year, with about 30% saying they supported it last year. That share has dipped recently to about 25%. Reform lost a special election in February to the Green Party in the Gorton and Denton district in northern England, and it lost another one last year in Caerphilly to Plaid Cymru, a centre-left Welsh nationalist party in contest for a seat in the Welsh Parliament. If we can't win in Makerfield, can we win anywhere? Tim Montgomery, a former Conservative who defected to Reform, wondered in an interview with the New York Times last month. The result may indicate, some analysts say, that Reform's agenda is so polarizing that a majority of British voters will opt for whatever party they believe can defeat it in any specific vote, even if it's not their first choice. For now, Mr. Burnham, who took a gamble by running in the Makerfield seat, has hit the political jackpot. The way that Burnham won has created an even greater sense of momentum and inevitability, that he's the one, he can save the Labour Party, said Mr. Fielding. It's in the Labour Party's interest for this to be resolved without a leadership contest by the end of next week. Russia's defensive fire may have caused blast. This article is by James McManning, Paul Sohn, and Malachi Brown. The dramatic explosion of a fuel storage facility in Moscow last week may have been caused not by a Ukrainian drone, but instead by a Russian air defense missile. An analysis of social media videos verified by the New York Times indicates. The blast, which happened Thursday, became the defining image of Ukraine's largest-scale drone attack on the Russian capital since the start of the war. In addition to the Ukrainian drones that reached their targets on Thursday, the Russian authorities said they had shot down 992 of the drones across the country that day. The roof of the storage silo flew high into the air, appearing to surf atop a plume of black smoke before plummeting to earth as the installation in southeast Moscow became engulfed in fire. The possibility that the explosion was a self-inflicted friendly fire incident highlighted the difficulties that Russian air defenses are facing as Ukraine increases the scale of its drone attacks to break through a layered shield of systems designed to protect the capital. A video verified by the Times and originally shared on the Chinese social media site Douyin shows traces of 2 air defense missiles being launched from the ground in what appears to be an attempt to intercept Ukrainian drones flying near the Pakotnya oil refinery. A missile travels in a low-flying trajectory toward the fuel silo, which erupts in an explosion around the time of its arrival at the facility. Experts said the missile looked consistent with a projectile fired from a portable air defense system, commonly called a man-pad, that soldiers use like guns to down incoming threats. The video strongly supports the supposition that this is a man-pad launch. In its origin, low trajectory and thin contrail with no accompanying launch smoke in its early moments of flight, said Michael Clark, a British security expert and professor of defense studies. Several other social media videos, also verified by the Times, show uniformed men on the side of a road on Thursday firing man-pads near the Moscow refinery in an attempt to take down Ukrainian drones flying overhead. Thursday's attack and others like it are part of an effort by President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to bring the war home for Russians and pressure President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia into negotiating an end to the conflict. They come amid a broader Ukrainian onslaught against oil and fuel facilities that has caused lines and rationing at Russian gas stations. Mr. Putin has not spoken publicly about the Thursday attack, which did not result in any deaths, or about continued Ukrainian attacks in the Moscow area on Friday. The governor of the Moscow region, Andrei Vorobyev, said that an 8-year-old girl had died in the attacks on Friday. Dmitry S. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said on Friday that Mr. Putin was receiving updates throughout the day and that the air defense systems are performing at a high level despite everything. The Russian Defense Ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment from the Times. The wars in Ukraine and the Middle East have demonstrated that defending against large swarms of cheap drones is one of the most difficult tasks in modern warfare. Old-school air defense systems, like the ones that protected the Russian capital, are expensive and were designed to shoot down incoming aircraft or missiles. Such systems were never expected to be used against the drones that Russia and now Ukraine are firing in such large quantities. On Friday, Russia appeared to have bolstered its defenses by placing a vehicle-mounted Pantsir missile defense system near the same highway where the military fired man-pads during Thursday's attack, according to footage verified by the Times. The systems can shoot down drones but struggle to counteract large swarms. Ukraine has only recently begun producing longer-range drones at a large scale, enabling Kyiv to launch the sort of drone attacks, numbering in the hundreds, that Russia has been directing against Ukrainian targets for some time. Ukraine still lacks the ballistic missiles that Russia regularly fires at Ukrainian cities. Russia is likely struggling with intercepting hundreds of drones in just the same way that Ukraine is, Mr. Saddington said, in intercepting them with large air defense missiles designed to shoot down combat aircraft is very expensive and will quickly reduce stockpiles, and so low-cost alternatives need to be sought. He said man-pads were not necessarily a great alternative, noting that firing them at low altitude in an urban environment was an indication of the desperation of the situation, possibly, in this case, with unintended consequences. Scientists debate whether climate change is supercharging El Niño by Chico Harlan. It's a vigorous debate taking place right now among scientists around the world, with far-reaching implications for extreme weather and costly disasters. Is climate change making El Nino more intense? El Nino, the natural phenomenon that occurs every few years and pushes up global temperatures, has just begun and is expected to continue through 2027. Scientists say this latest version is likely to be especially potent and could smash records. As greenhouse gases heat over the planet, El Nino events over the past few decades have been comparatively strong. The run of powerful El Niños since the 1980s stands out when measured against the past 600 years. That's led some scientists to suggest that climate change is supercharging El Nino. Others say there is no clear evidence to support that theory. It's highly contested because it's such an important question to get right, said Kim Cobb, a climate scientist and the director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society. It's a mystery that might not become clear until years into the future as more data piles up. The question is crucial because El Niños disrupt weather patterns globally, often in devastating ways, driving temperatures higher, increasing the likelihood of drought in some places and flooding in others. The events are essentially ocean anomalies, and if climate changes make these anomalies larger in size, that means more chaos and damage. But the debate shows that there are limits to how fully scientists can understand some of the most complicated consequences of rising greenhouse gas emissions, which result primarily from the burning of fossil fuels. El Niño events are notoriously complex. They are driven not by a single cause, but by a series of feedback loops in the ocean and atmosphere. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration once described El Niño and its cool Pacific counterpart, known as La Niña, as cycle controlled by hundreds of dimmer switches. Climate change can fiddle with those switches, turning some up and others down, but does that lead to a stronger or a weaker signal? El Niño is the noisiest part of the climate system, said Axel Timmerman, the director of the IBS Center for Climate Physics in Busan, South Korea. We're trying to look for change in the noise. Of 16 scientists who spoke with the Times, 8 said they see compelling evidence that climate change is likely increasing the intensity of El Niño events. Among them is Michael McFadden, a senior scientist at NOAA, who cautioned that the science is very uncertain, but said the development of another strong El Niño this year would be pretty remarkable. If the current El Niño reaches the proportions that many forecast it means 3 of 6 strongest events since 1950 have come in the last 11 years. El Niño events are measured by looking at changes in the sea surface temperatures in a vast rectangular zone in the Central Pacific, where temperatures are soaring. Many forecasts indicate that the temperatures there this year could rise more than 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit or 3 degrees Celsius above the longer-term average, giving rise to an El Niño of unprecedented amplitude. It could be evidence that climate change signal in today's ENSO cycle is beginning to emerge from the background noise, Dr. McFadden said, using the acronym for the cycle of El Niños and La Niñas. Perhaps the most assertive case is made by Wenju Kai, a scientist at the Ocean University of China, who has spent more than 20 years running climate models and trying to tease out potential link between rising emissions and the more powerful El Niños. In a 2023 study published in Nature, Dr. Kai and other scientists simulated hundreds of years of El Niño and La Niña events in an imaginary world where greenhouse gas concentrations remained at the low levels before the Industrial Revolution. The odds of such a world producing a 60-year run of strong events compared to the modern times, 2.5%. It's almost impossible to have this without climate change, Dr. Kai said. Many future-looking models also project El Niño intensity to increase. Still, other scientists caution that models can have flaws. They note there are limits in the historic record. Precise oceanic readings date back to the 1950s. A decent account of ocean temperatures from sailor logbooks extend into the 1800s. Beyond that, scientists have tried to understand El Niño's fluctuations by looking for signatures of weather and temperature change left in the corals and tree rings. That provides a meaningful estimate about the amplitude and frequency of past events, but not certainty. Clara Desser, a senior scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, said the El Niños of recent decades may be just a random signal. "I'm the skeptical scientist," Dr. Desser said. "How much is just due to the chaos in the climate system that can give you a whole string of heads or tails for no apparent reason?" Because there is no consensus, scientific groups have tended to move carefully. In 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's preeminent climate science body, wrote that there was, quote, low confidence that human-caused climate change had influenced the changes in El Niño and La Niña. Earlier this month, the World Meteorological Organization, in an advisory about the developing El Niño, said there's no evidence that climate change increases the frequency or intensity of El Niño events. Responding to a question from the Times, the WMO stated that its position reflects the current assessed state of science. However, it's important also to acknowledge that ongoing scientific debate, the organization said, this is not a settled scientific question. Dr. Cobb, an IPCC lead author, said she personally thinks that climate change is intensifying the pattern. In 2019, she co-authored a research paper based on coral analysis that concluded modern-day El Niño extremes were significantly stronger than those of the pre-industrial era in the central tropical Pacific. There is widespread agreement that any El Niño occurring now, compared with the pre-industrial times, will yield more extremes around the world, with a moister atmosphere supercharging floods and hotter temperatures amplifying droughts. El Niño conditions will pour fuel on the fire of a warming world, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said this month. Impacts will hit even harder. Reflecting Pool turns into a blue-green headache by Ashavara Kavi. First, the new paint job appeared uneven. Then an algae bloom turned the water an acid green. Now large chunks of coating are peeling off the basin, creating islands of the American flag blue alongside patches of pea green and dark murky soup. The reflecting pool at the Lincoln Memorial seems to be rejecting its makeover. President Trump's project to reseal and paint the concrete basin of the century-old pool that stretches between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial in Washington was finished nearly 2 weeks ago, in time for the country's 250th birthday, as he demanded. But it has been nothing but a headache for the administration since. The Interior Department said on social media last week that its workers had killed the algae that had been hastened on by the heat and humidity. The water it boasted now crystal clear. The posts were accompanied by images of the Washington Monument reflected in deep blue waters, an apparent rebuttal to criticism from experts who say the pool's waters will not appear brilliant blue until the government tackles the underlying problems that have stumped previous presidential administrations. But on Friday afternoon, the murky water was stained by loose clumps of algae, even where National Park Service staff members had scrubbed away the bright green blooms along the bottom of the basin. The new coating was also missing at least 2 large sections. One gap was about the size of a park bench, with a sheet several inches long flapping in the waves. Underneath appeared to be the original concrete basin. Alexander Hobe, 52, was standing at the pool's edge, waving a small chip of paint. He had been making food deliveries in the area when he decided to see the pool renovations. When he spotted the chip floating in the water, he fished it out. It was semi-transparent and rough to the touch. Mr. Hobie called the pool renovation a complete failure, but expressed sympathy for the workers who were standing knee-deep in green water and scrubbing away under the hot sun. They've been out here for days, he said. On Friday night, Mr. Trump blamed at least some of the problems on vandalism by people who said they were out to destroy and demean our beautiful work. The algae is 75% gone, and the condition will soon be completely remedied, and the area that was vandalized, fortunately, is just a small area of damage and will be fixed early next week, he wrote on social media. The pool was plagued by multiple problems, including leaky and broken pipes that often leave it disconnected from its filtration system. Those issues were not addressed by the recent renovations. Workers have instead tried a series of temporary fixes, including adding hydrogen peroxide to the water last week in an attempt to kill the algae. The cleanup effort was hard to miss on Friday. Sightseers stepped over pipes carrying acid green water from the pool to nearby storm drains, and they raised their voices to speak over the whirring water filtration systems and fuel-guzzling water pumps. Most workers at the pool wore National Park Service gear. It was unclear if the work was related to the installation of water purification system. The Times reported on Thursday that a business tied to a longtime supporter of Mr. Trump was given a no-bid contract to install a system earlier this spring. In many cases, visitors appeared to gaze with more interest at the contents of the murky pool than toward the historic monuments reflected in its waters. "I don't even know what they're doing," one woman exclaimed as she walked toward the Lincoln Memorial. Trey Quealy, 29, from West Virginia, had stopped by the pool with a friend after seeing a show at the Kennedy Center on Thursday night. "Of course we had to stop by and see what everyone's talking about," Mr. Quealy said, adding that he worked in a supply chain logistics and sympathized with how difficult it must be to find the right professional to do the job. The Times has reported that the Interior Department awarded a no-bid contract to a firm that Mr. Trump said he had recommended because it previously worked on the swimming pools at one of his golf clubs, a decision that skirted federal bidding laws. But Mr. Quealy noted that he had seen the pool many times before Mr. Trump's renovation and had never thought twice about its appearance. "I thought it looked great," Mr. Quealy recalled, "and it took me back to watching Forrest Gump," referring to the scene from the 1994 movie where the two characters wade into the water. He added, "I would not have thought it was a necessary change." New York's Democratic Socialists Target Congress by Jeffrey C. Mays and Benjamin Oreskes. As New Yorkers were headed to the polls for the start of the early voting last week, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic Minority Leader, made a late-stage campaign appearance in Manhattan to try and fend off an uprising from the left. The appearance by Mr. Jeffries last Saturday was meant to prop up Representative Adriano Espaillat, a five-term Democratic incumbent facing an unexpectedly stiff challenge from Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, a first-time candidate and Democratic socialist who has the backing of Mayor Zohan Mamdani. But Mr. Jeffries saw the threat as something larger. "We're all committed to doing what's necessary to make life better for the people of this city and for the people of this country," Mr. Jeffries said at the campaign event. And to him, that meant rejecting the vigorous push by the Democratic Socialists of America to claim more ground in Congress. For much of the DSA's existence, the group focused its resources and endorsements on local and state legislative races, hoping to grow its influence incrementally. But after the group helped spearhead Mr. Mamdani's stunning victory last year, the DSA's calculus has changed. It's now targeting high-profile House races, enlisting some of the 100,000 people who volunteered for the Mamdani campaign to win over voters in gentrifying neighborhoods once thought to be hostile to socialist candidates. From Washington Heights in Manhattan to Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, the organization's New York City chapter has endorsed candidates in 10 state and federal primaries, the largest slate in its history. In a section of Brooklyn and Queens that has come to be known as the Commie Corridor, the DSA is backing Claire Valdez, a state assemblywoman, against Antonio Reynosa, the borough president of Brooklyn. Ms. Valdez has the mayor's support. Mr. Reynoso is endorsed by the current office holder, Representative Nadia Velasquez, who is retiring this year and was the first Puerto Rican woman elected to Congress. Ms. Valdez and Mr. Reynoso are both Latino. The group is also seeking to knock off several incumbent state lawmakers in historically black neighborhoods like Central Harlem, where Conrad Blackburn is challenging Assemblyman Jordan Wright, the son of Keith Wright, the chairman of the Manhattan Democratic Party. Mr. Blackburn, like Mr. Wright, is black. "There's people in this community who voted for my grandfather, my father, my uncle, and myself," the assemblyman said at a recent visit to an older adult center. Then, referring to Mr. Blackburn, he added, I don't know how long he's been there. Other mainstream Democrats have adopted similar language in describing the DSA-backed candidates as outsiders looking to usurp political power from longtime residents. The individuals that you see here have grown up in that community, Representative Gregory W. Meeks, chairman of the Queens Democratic Party, said at the event with Mr. Jeffries on Saturday. For Mr. Jeffries, it was his second event with Mr. Espelot that day. They know the problems of that community, Mr. Meeks continued, and they know how to solve and resolve problems in those communities. Even Mr. Reynoso, who is a progressive Democrat, said in a recent debate that he has not joined the DSA because he didn't feel comfortable meeting regularly with a population that is not representative of an entire district, claiming that the group was mostly white men. Mr. Blackburn, a public defender in the Bronx backed by the DSA, seemed to understand how he might be perceived. As he headed to the Manhattanville houses in West Harlem to knock on voters' doors, he asked his campaign manager for what he called the auntie literature. He was handed a stack of campaign flyers that were approved by his ad hoc advisory committee of aunties, a group of older, mostly black women who live in the district and want to see him win. The auntie lit features Mr. Blackburn, a DSA member, in a hooded sweatshirt as compared with the other flyers in which he is pictured wearing a suit. The hoodie, his aunts advised, made him look more like their grandson than a career politician. We're trying to get the DSA to have different understanding of how to run a race in these districts, Mr. Blackburn said. If the DSA is successful, it could double the number of socialists in the House from 2 to 4 and gain a larger voice in the state legislature in Albany. Still, some organizers fear the group could lose effectiveness as its members work on more races than ever before. Top DSA officials convened an emergency meeting on Wednesday, saying they were concerned with the sluggish turnout, particularly among young voters, and that far fewer doors had been knocked than the mayoral primary, according to one person who was present for the meeting. If we run too many races, we could be spread too thin, said State Senator Jabari Brisport, a DSA incumbent in Brooklyn, who was not at the meeting, but is facing a challenge from Marlon Rice, a community organizer who is a moderate. At the same time, elections bring people in and actually build capacity. The DSA has experienced growing pains before. After winning 5 seats in the legislature in 2020, the organization failed to capitalize on its momentum in 2022. We were very ambitious, and we lost some races very narrowly, recalled Ms. Valdez, who joined the DSA in 2019 and worked on campaigns of earlier Democratic Socialist allies like Julia Salazar, a state senator. Those defeats made Ms. Valdez apprehensive when Mr. Mamdani was gearing up to run for mayor in 2024. She feared he couldn't win and would drain resources that would otherwise be used on legislative races and advocacy battles. A loss might have also fed the narrative that their ideological worldview was on the retreat. She said that Mr. Mamdani ended up convincing her that having a DSA member run for citywide office was a really big risk worth taking because it could build the organization and introduce it to a lot of people. Since October 2024, when the DSA endorsed Mr. Mamdani, membership in the organization has more than doubled to 14,000 from 5,900, according to Gustavo Gordillo, a local DSA chapter co-chair. The Hispanic and Asian population saw substantial declines, and there were a large increase in the percentage of the district that is college educated. Nearly half the population now has at least a bachelor's degree, placing the district among the top 6 most educated districts in New York State. The hope now is that the high-profile runs by Ms. Avila Chevalier and Ms. Valdez will help insurgent candidates running for the state legislature on overlapping or adjacent districts. We have to win these 2 congressional races if we want to keep growing our power, Mr. Gordillo said at Wednesday's DSA meeting, according to one attendee. The congressional races, they supercharge our down-ballot races. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, June 21st, 2026 issue of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Jean. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure. And at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability,